My name is Eleanor Briggs. I'm 58 years old, and just 3 days ago, I buried my husband of 40 years. But this story is not only about grief. It's about what happens when the people you raised, your own children, see your love and sacrifices as nothing more than convenience, when they weigh your value in inheritance instead of memories, and when your son skips his father's funeral to attend a birthday party for his wife's mother. Yes, my son Nathan didn't show up to say goodbye to the man who taught him how to ride a bike, paid his college tuition, and built a life from the ground up so his kids would never have to go without. He missed the funeral. He didn't answer my call the night Richard died, and when he finally returned it 5 hours later, all I got was a half-hearted, "Sorry, Mom, I was busy." Busy. That word hit me harder than the silence in our bedroom, harder than the empty seat at the service, harder than the tears I hadn't yet cried. And my daughter, Elisa? Well, she called too, but not to comfort me, not to ask if I'd eaten or if I was sleeping. She had another agenda entirely. That's when I realized this wasn't just the story of a widow. It was the story of a woman waking up. A woman who had spent her life giving, nurturing, building, and was now being asked to step aside. What they didn't know was this: I wasn't ready to disappear, and they were about to find out what I was really made of. That morning, the silence in the house felt like a scream. It wasn't just quiet, it was a hollow kind of silence that made everything echo. The ticking of the old grandfather clock downstairs became unbearable. Richard used to call it the heartbeat of our home, but now, every tick was a reminder that his heart had stopped forever. I sat in bed, staring at the ceiling, counting the same little cracks Richard had promised to fix next weekend for the last 15 years. Now, no weekend would ever come. His pillow was still warm from the night before, though I knew it was just from how tightly I held it all night. I buried my face in it, breathing in the familiar scent of Old Spice and the faint musk that was uniquely his. It brought no comfort, only ache. The doctors had said it was quick. A heart attack. No pain, no warning. They made it sound like a mercy, but nothing about it felt merciful. 40 years together, and not even a goodbye. I finally sat up. The house felt too big, too empty. Even the sunlight filtering through the curtains seemed colder, lonelier. Richard used to complain about those curtains. Might as well be sleeping under a spotlight, he'd say, but never got around to replacing them. One of those small, unfinished things that now feel enormous. His blue suit from our anniversary dinner last month still hung on the closet door. The dry cleaning tag was still on it. His reading glasses sat on top of a Stephen King novel he'd never finish. These little relics of a life paused mid-sentence. Mine. I made my way to the bathroom and caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. The woman staring back was someone I barely recognized. Eyes rimmed red, hair dull and loose. I looked older than I did a week ago, much older. In the kitchen, I made coffee on autopilot, poured 2 cups. It wasn't until I placed them on the counter that I remembered he wasn't here anymore. His mug read, "World's Best Dad," faded from years of use, a gift from Nathan when he was 10. I picked it up and something inside me cracked open. The tears came hard and fast. My body shook as I clung to the countertop. I was alone. And everything that was supposed to be shared, coffee, silence, mornings, was now mine to endure alone. This was grief, not loud or dramatic, but relentless. The sound of my phone buzzing on the counter snapped me out of the moment. I wiped my face quickly with the sleeve of my sweater, trying to pull myself together. I wasn't ready for condolences, not from distant friends, not from neighbors who didn't know what to say, but felt obligated to say something. But it wasn't one of them, it was Alyssa. "Mom, are you up?" her text read. I took a deep breath and typed back, "Yes." Seconds later, the phone rang. "Hey, Mom," she said, her voice soft but businesslike, the kind of tone people use when they have something to say but want to pretend they're being gentle. "Just wanted to check in, see how you're doing." How was I doing? How do you explain to your child that your entire world just vanished? That you still reach for someone in the dark only to find air? That you count the seconds between sobs like a child counts sheep? "I'm fine," I replied. The lie was easier than the truth. Alyssa hesitated for a second. Then I heard it. The shift in her tone. The lead-in. "Mom, Nathan and I were talking and we think you should consider selling the house." I froze. The stares, the sighs, it's too much for you now, especially being alone. I clenched the edge of the counter, heat rising in my chest. "I'm 58, I said sharply, "not 88. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then a softer, more calculated voice replied, "We're just thinking of you, Mom. And, well, there's also the financial side of things. Dad's pension, the upkeep." To there it was. Not concern, not care. Not grief, business. I cut her off. "Can we not do this today?" Of course, she backtracked. "Actually, that's partly why I called. Nathan and I thought we could come by this weekend, help you go through Dad's things, the will, insurance paperwork, all that." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. They weren't coming to comfort me. They were coming to inventory the remains. "I've got it handled," I said firmly. "The lawyer's coming Friday." "You sure you don't want support?" she pressed. What I wanted was my husband. What I got was a reminder that even in his death, people were calculating what they could take from him. And I wasn't going to let that happen. After I hung up with Elisa, I sat down at the kitchen table, my coffee untouched. And I thought about Nathan. 3 nights ago, I called him the moment the paramedics told me Richard was gone. I was crying so hard I could barely say the words. But the call rang, and went to voicemail. I called again, straight to voicemail this time. I sent a text, "Nathan, your dad just passed away. Please call me." No reply. 5 hours later, my phone buzzed. A message. "Sorry, Mom. I was at Diane's mom's birthday party. Just saw this. Call you tomorrow?" Tomorrow. That single word lit a fire of anger inside me that I didn't know I had. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't say "I'm coming." He didn't even call. He texted. I had just lost the man I'd spent my whole life loving, and our son couldn't be bothered to step outside a party and answer the phone. Richard raised him better than that. He taught him to look people in the eye, to show up when it matters, to put family first. But somewhere along the way, Nathan had traded those values for convenience, for comfort, for whatever his in-laws thought was more important than saying goodbye to his father. And the part that hurt the most? I wasn't even surprised. Maybe a small part of me had known it would be like this. That somewhere, I had lost the boy who used to follow his father around at job sites, wide-eyed and curious. He had grown up, but he hadn't grown into the man his father hoped he'd be. And now he was about to find out that I wasn't the kind of mother who would pretend that was okay. Friday morning arrived with the kind of dull gray sky that makes everything feel heavier. At precisely 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Grant Walters standing there, our family's attorney for over 30 years and one of Richard's oldest friends. He was holding his worn leather briefcase like it carried a bomb, not just a stack of papers. "Eleanor," he said gently, his voice lined with fatigue and empathy. "I'm so sorry." He stepped inside and glanced at the second mug of coffee on the counter. I hadn't realized I'd poured 2 again. His eyes met mine. He understood. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Richard and I had spent decades talking about everything from grocery lists to retirement plans. Now, it was a place for final decisions. "I know this is difficult," Grant began, opening his briefcase with slow, deliberate care. "But Richard left very specific instructions. He wanted this to be handled quickly and with clarity." I nodded. I was ready, at least, I thought I was. "You'll inherit the house," he said. "The bulk of the investments, the life insurance, you retain full control." That was expected. Richard and I had built this life together. We shared everything. But then Grant hesitated. He also established 2 irrevocable trusts, one for Alyssa, one for Nathan. I blinked. They'll each receive the funds when they turn 40. Alyssa was turning 40 next month. Nathan, in 3 years. "How much?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. He told me. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to buy a house outright or send 2 kids to college. It was a gift, a safety net. He never told me. I looked down at the table, my hands suddenly still. Why didn't he tell me? He wanted it to be a surprise, Grant explained. Something they'd discover when the time came. A head start. A head start they hadn't earned. Nathan hadn't even shown up. Alyssa was already trying to get me out of the house. And here they were, about to receive gifts from a man they hadn't even taken the time to mourn. "There's more," Grant added, "about the business." And of course there was. "Mitchell Builders," he said, "will be majority owned by you, 60%. But Richard allocated 20% each to the kids." I froze. "They'll be entitled to their shares of profit. And some voting rights, though you maintain control." The company was Richard's legacy. He'd poured his soul into it. And now, pieces of it were being handed to children who hadn't lifted a single hammer. Grant reached into his briefcase again. "There's one last thing," he said, placing 3 envelopes on the table. "Letters, one for each of you." I stared at the envelope with my name on it written in Richard's familiar handwriting. I wasn't ready, but I knew I would have to read it. That evening, after Grant left and the house returned to its unbearable stillness, I sat at the kitchen table with the letter in my hand. I turned it over twice before opening it. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. Richard's handwriting greeted me like a ghost. Strong, slanted, familiar. "My dearest Eleanor," it began. I could hear his voice. Calm, steady, like he was right across from me, sipping his coffee, reading the morning news. "If you're reading this, then I've left you alone. Something I swore I'd never do. I'm sorry. I hope it was quick. I hope you didn't see it." The tears came instantly, but I kept reading. "I know you'll be holding everything together right now, because that's who you are. But I need you to do more than survive this. I need you to live through it. We gave our children everything. Maybe too much. Maybe we confused love with comfort. But you can't let them take that for granted. Not our home, not the business, not you." That line hit me hard. Not you. I'd spent years trying to make everyone comfortable. Richard worked day and night to build our life, and I held everything else together. The meals, the school projects, the birthdays, the nights waiting up, the soft landings. And now, our children didn't even recognize the cost of that love. "I know you'll want to keep the peace," he wrote, "but sometimes peace has to be earned. Remind them of what matters, Elle. Remind them who their father was. Remind them who you are." When I finished the letter, my hands were wet with tears. But something else had replaced the ache in my chest. Resolve. This wasn't just about grief anymore. It was about clarity. Richard had seen what I was just beginning to see, that love without limits becomes entitlement. I folded the letter and pressed it to my chest. Tomorrow, Nathan and Elisa were coming. They thought they were walking into a house full of memories and paperwork. What they didn't know was that they were about to meet someone new. Not just a widow. A woman rising. Saturday came faster than I expected. At exactly noon, the doorbell rang. I knew who it was before I even looked. Punctual, just as Grant said they would be. Not a minute early. Not for love or grief, but right on time when it came to business. I opened the door to find Elisa standing there, dressed like she was heading to brunch in the city. Her perfume hit me before her words did. Roses, artificial and overpowering. Nathan stood behind her in a pressed shirt, looking uncomfortable but not enough to turn back. "Mom," Elisa said, leaning in for a hug. "You look..." "Well." I didn't. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. They entered like guests, not children coming home. Elisa's eyes scanned the foyer with the gaze of a real estate agent. Nathan wandered toward the living room like he'd forgotten how it used to be his favorite place as a child. "Can I get you something?" I asked, because the ritual of politeness was hard to shake. "We're good," Elisa said, settling onto the sofa like she owned it. "We just wanted to see how you're holding up." I didn't answer. Nathan filled the silence. "Place looks good, Mom. You keeping busy?" Something in me snapped. "Busy?" I repeated, my voice calm but cold. "Yes, Nathan, I've been very busy, planning your father's funeral, meeting with his attorney, going through 40 years of memories, quite busy indeed." He flushed and opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. "You're here now. Let's not pretend this visit is about me." Elisa shifted in her seat. "We care about you, Mom. But yes, Stanley mentioned the trusts. Is that true?" There it was, no hesitation, no soft entry, just straight to the point. "Yes," I said simply. "Each of you will receive your trusts at 40. Elisa, that's next month. Nathan, you in 3 years. Elisa tried to smile. "Dad always planned ahead." "Did he?" I asked lightly. "You've hardly mentioned him since the funeral." A beat of silence fell between us. "It's been hard," Nathan muttered, "for all of us." "Has it?" I stood and walked to the mantel. I picked up a photograph of Richard on a construction site, his face sunburned and smiling, standing in front of a house he'd built from nothing. "It was so hard you couldn't answer your phone when I called to tell you he died?" Nathan looked down. "I've already apologized for that." "You were at Diane's mother's birthday party," I said flatly. He nodded once. "It was a mistake." "Yes," I said. "And it told me everything I needed to know." I turned and faced them both. "Your father left you each 20% of Mitchell Builders. That means you're entitled to profits, not decision-making." Elisa sat up straighter. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means you get money from a company you've never worked a day in. Just like you've been handed everything else in your lives." "Mom, that's not fair," Nathan started. "No," I interrupted. "What's unfair is watching your father build something brick by brick, while the two of you waited for him to die so you could collect." Their silence told me I'd finally been heard. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt like their mother again. And I was just getting started. Mitchell Builders wasn't just a business. It was Richard's third child, maybe even his first. He started it with a borrowed pickup truck, a rusted toolbox, and a dream. I still remember the nights he'd come home with sawdust in his hair and blueprints under his arm. We ate dinner late, more nights than not, because he stayed at job sites making sure everything was perfect, down to the last nail. And I was there too, balancing checkbooks, taking calls, scheduling deliveries, raising 2 kids while building a company with my husband. Brick by brick, contract. Nathan and Elisa had the best of everything because of it. Summer camps, private schools, college degrees without student loans. But they never really saw what it cost. The sleepless nights, the winters without heat in our own house because we were waiting on payments from clients just to make payroll. And now here they were, claiming a share in something they didn't help create, asking questions about profit margins and company structure like they had a right to it. "You'll receive your 20%, I said, watching their faces carefully. "But understand this, I own 60, and I plan to honor the integrity your father built this business on." They didn't argue, not because they agreed, but because, for once, they understood I meant every word. And this time, I wouldn't be backing down. I wasn't just protecting a company, I was protecting a legacy. I looked at both of them, my children, my flesh and blood, and for the first time, I saw them not as who they used to be, but as who they had become. Comfortable, entitled, distant. "You think your inheritance is money," I said quietly. "But that's not what your father left behind." They stared at me, confused. He left behind something far greater than trust funds or business shares. He left behind a name built on honesty, a reputation that took decades to earn, a home full of memories, a wife who stood beside him through it all. I paused. If you can't honor that, if you can't carry it with the same care he did, then you haven't inherited anything at all. The room fell silent. No rebuttal, no defense. Just silence. Because deep down, I think they finally understood. They hadn't just lost their father, they were at risk of losing everything he truly stood for. Later that night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the same Eleanor from a week ago. She wasn't the quiet wife who let things slide to keep the peace. She wasn't the mother who made excuses for grown children. She wasn't the widow frozen in grief. No, this woman had clarity in her eyes. My hair was still a little unkempt, my face still worn from sleepless nights, but behind the fatigue was something solid, something sharp, something alive. Richard had believed in me even after death. He saw strength in me I hadn't yet claimed. And now, with every choice I made, I would carry his voice like armor. I walked through the house that night with purpose, not to mourn, but to take back what was mine. Our home, our story, our legacy. I didn't know what would come next, what battles I'd still have to fight, but I knew one thing for sure. I would not be reduced, not to a footnote in my husband's will, not to a grieving figure in someone else's future. I would live on, not just for him, but for myself, for the woman I had been too scared to become while he was alive. That woman had arrived, and she was not going anywhere. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you of your worth, your strength, or someone you know who's forgotten theirs, share it. If you've ever had to reclaim your voice after years of silence, tell us in the comments. Your story might help someone else find theirs. And if you believe that love, when combined with truth and courage, creates the kind of power that changes everything, like this video, subscribe for more stories that honor strength, dignity, and quiet transformation. Because sometimes rising from the ashes isn't loud. It's steady, and it's unforgettable.